There is a particular comfort in being told that the world has misunderstood love. In the late 1960s, many young people were already searching for alternatives. Alternatives to war, to rigid institutions, to families that felt distant and mechanical. Into that atmosphere stepped a movement that didn't look dangerous. It looked warm. They called themselves the family, later Children of God. They spoke about restoring early Christianity, shared meals, shared homes, shared purpose, guitars in living rooms, handwritten scripture passed between friends. No one ate alone. Their message was simple. We live for love. From the inside, it didn't feel extreme. It felt like relief. A place where emotional intensity wasn't embarrassing, where affection wasn't rationed, where belonging wasn't conditional on status or wealth. Recruitment rarely looked like recruitment. It looked like conversation. A stranger on a beach, outside a concert, in a park. Have you ever wanted something deeper? You didn't sign a contract. You didn't renounce the world in a single dramatic gesture. You stayed for dinner. You joined a prayer circle. You read a letter from the leader, David Berg, distributed as something intimate, almost personal. The Mo letters, they felt like direct guidance, not sermons, not bureaucracy, just clarity. Suspicion didn't collapse overnight, it softened. Because the attention felt real. Someone listened to you. Someone remembered your name. Someone told you that your longing wasn't weakness. It was spiritual sensitivity. At some point, quietly, trust replaced doubt. And once trust feels sacred, questioning begins to feel like betrayal. That is where the design begins. The family did not rely on chains. It relied on reinterpretation. Control wasn't announced. It was introduced through language. Sex, for example, was not described as desire. It was described as service. Recruitment through intimacy was given a name that sounded almost playful. Flirty fishing. Fishing implies patience. Flirting implies charm. Together they softened what was happening. In internal writings, intimacy was described as God's bait, not indulgence, not manipulation, a sacred tactic. From the inside, this felt liberating. Traditional morality was framed as repressive, hypocritical. Here, desire could be spiritual, affection could be revolutionary. From the outside, it looked strategic. Language did something else. It redefined jealousy. If someone struggled with partner rotation or communal intimacy, the struggle wasn't treated as emotional complexity. It was labeled possessiveness. God's love is not possessive. That phrase ended many conversations. You weren't being overridden, you were being corrected, and correction inside a spiritual framework feels like growth. Reward reinforced it. Members who recruited successfully were praised publicly. Sometimes it was just a sentence read aloud during a gathering. Maria brought 3 new souls this week. A small acknowledgement, but powerful. Visibility meant value. Affection was also redistributed. Proximity to respected members or leaders wasn't random. It followed obedience. The more you surrendered exclusivity, the more you were seen as spiritually mature. Compliance generated warmth. Hesitation generated distance. No one needed to threaten you. You felt the difference. Fear worked differently here. There were no fences, no visible locks. The fear was interpretive. The outside world became the system, corrupt, spiritually compromised, blind. To leave wasn't just to walk away from friends, it was to re-enter contamination. One former member described raising concerns and being told quietly, "You're letting the enemy whisper." It wasn't shouted, it didn't need to be. If doubt equals spiritual vulnerability, then doubt becomes dangerous, and the most effective fear is not fear of punishment. It is fear of meaninglessness. If your purpose, your salvation, your community all exist inside the group, departure feels like erasure. Isolation followed naturally. Communal living blurred biological families. Romantic pairs were destabilized. Children referred to adults collectively. Authority appeared shared, but interpretation flowed downward, from Berg's letters. During gatherings, members often spoke in the same phrases. Language synchronized. Individual speech patterns softened into shared vocabulary. Isolation doesn't always look like confinement. Sometimes it looks like everyone agreeing. At the center of all this was David Berg, Moses David, often physically distant, but textually constant. When conflict arose, someone would produce a printed letter and say, "Father has already answered this." Debate ended there. The authority wasn't loud, it was embedded. And over time, something subtle happened. Members stopped needing correction. They began correcting themselves. Discomfort became evidence of ego. Jealousy became immaturity. Reluctance became lack of faith. The system no longer felt imposed, it felt chosen. And that distinction matters. Because once people believe they are choosing, control becomes almost invisible. There is rarely a dramatic moment when someone realizes they cannot leave. The threshold forms gradually. Language shifts first. The outside world isn't just different, it's the system, and those who live in it are systemites. The word carries weight. It implies blindness. If you hesitate, especially about intimate directives, you're told gently, "You're still thinking like a systemite." That's not an argument. It's a diagnosis. Once doubt becomes a symptom, you begin monitoring yourself. Recognition deepens the bind. A former member recalled the first time her name was praised publicly. A leader smiled and said, "She's really surrendered." Surrender became a compliment. That brief approval carried disproportionate meaning. It signaled belonging at a higher level. It transformed overridden discomfort into proof of growth. The more you complied, the more you were seen. And leaving no longer meant walking away from a belief system, it meant losing your interpretive framework, your friends, your routines, possibly your children raised communally. One interaction captures it clearly. A member questioning policy was handed a Mo letter. "Father has already answered this." Conversation over. At this stage, authority is internalized. You no longer ask, "What do I think?" You ask, "What has Father said?" And then something irreversible happens. You begin defending the system to newcomers. You hear yourself repeating phrases you once resisted. Cognitive dissonance resolves not by exit but by deeper loyalty. The point of no return is not a slammed door. It is the moment when leaving feels like losing meaning, and most people do not choose meaninglessness. The family expanded across countries. not because it was invisible, because it looked familiar. Publicly, they described themselves as missionaries, devout Christians, volunteers. Their pamphlets quoted scripture. Their gatherings featured music and children sitting in orderly rows. A neighbor once recalled watching them in a European park. They seemed disciplined, he said, not dangerous. That impression mattered. Authorities are cautious with religious groups, especially in societies that protect spiritual freedom. Internal doctrine, however unconventional, is not automatically prosecutable, and much of what happened inside appeared voluntary. Adults described their participation as chosen. Without visible force, intervention thresholds remained high. Mobility helped. Communes relocated frequently. Smaller enclaves replaced centralized compounds. Allegations in one country did not automatically trigger coordinated review in another. Externally, leadership maintained distance. Controversial policies could be described as misunderstandings, deviations, personal choices. Society participated in its own rationalization. They are unconventional, but unconventional is not illegal. They are intense, but intensity is not coercion. In a cultural era already experimenting with communal living and sexual liberation, the family's internal structure blended into the background. What felt comprehensive inside looked eccentric outside. And systems that look eccentric often survive longer than systems that look threatening. The cost did not always announce itself immediately. It accumulated quietly, especially in children. When you grow up inside a system, you inherit its vocabulary before you inherit alternatives. Sharing replaces exclusivity. Obedience pairs with love. Correction becomes training. One former member remembered saying at 7 years old after being reprimanded, "Love is obedience." Not defiantly, naturally. If obedience equals love, then resistance equals rejection. Affection often followed compliance. A nod, a smile, a hand on the shoulder. Approval was subtle but measurable. Children learned to scan faces, to calibrate themselves. Fear was rarely theatrical. It was existential. The outside world was spiritually dangerous. Questioning authority invited catastrophe. Even years later, some former members described feeling disproportionate guilt over small acts of independence, choosing different music, asserting romantic boundaries. The structure lingered internally. Education filtered information. Alternative frameworks were limited. When a teenager once asked why other Christian groups did not practice communal intimacy, the answer was simple. They're not ready for deeper truth. Inquiry closed. Authority flowed downward. Parents deferred to leaders. Leaders deferred to Berg's letters. Experiences were translated into doctrine. Confusion became testing. Pain became purification. From the inside, everything had meaning. From the outside, accountability blurred. The most enduring cost was not only what occurred within the community, it was the architecture that remained in people long after they left. Intimacy tangled with obligation, affection tangled with performance, and disentangling that can take years. The family eventually fractured, rebranded, dispersed. But mechanisms do not dissolve so easily. They migrate. What made this structure effective was not secrecy alone. It aligned with something stable in human psychology: the desire to be chosen, to be close, to belong without reservation. Coercion that arrives as threat can be resisted. Coercion that arrives as warmth is harder to name. The formula is simple. Redefine intimacy as service. Measure devotion through its expression. Reinterpret hesitation as immaturity. Once affection becomes proof of loyalty, boundaries begin to look selfish. And when belonging feels sacred, people defend it. Not because they are naive, but because belonging is powerful. From the inside, it feels expansive. You are part of something larger than yourself, free from isolation, free from convention. From the outside, the same dissolution of boundaries can function as access. The unsettling truth is not that people believed, it is that belief felt reasonable. At each step, infrastructure does not feel like a cage while you are living inside it. It feels like home, and that is what makes it so difficult to recognize until you are already inside.